if you look at the data, this is shown so clearly in the data on homeschoolers. There is now a lot of research. In fact, there's decades of research showing that homeschoolers do massively better academically and socially. They're far more likely to retain their parents' values, which I think is one of the things that many totalitarians dislike so strongly about homeschooling.
So Alex, we've been talking about the need for parents to regain control of their kids' education, that God's given this responsibility and this privilege, this sacred privilege, to us as parents. But many parents feel like they've completely lost control of their kids' education and they're not sure what to do. I mean, what other options do they have?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important questions we could be asking ourselves as a society right now, Kirk, and I'm not exaggerating one bit. I think if we continue on the path that we're on, it's going to inevitably lead to disaster. And so parents right now really need to be considering this very seriously. One alternative is just keep doing the same thing we've been doing for 60, 70 years, trying to reform the system, trying to do this, that, or the other. I think the best option that a parent has is to just make the decision right now, I'm going to reclaim control over the education of my children. And I really believe that homeschooling is the gold standard. I don't think it's the only acceptable or decent way to educate children. I think the benefits are just so enormous that parents, if there's any way you can do it, I can't recommend it highly enough. My wife and I, we homeschool our 5 children. It's, I say, one of the best decisions that we've ever made. I think it's right in line with what the Bible teaches. If you go to Deuteronomy 6, right, parents, you're supposed to be teaching your children when they wake up in the morning, when they're walking by the way, when they're eating, when they're laying down to go to bed. Parents, you lead it, and that's the best way to go.
The benefits to homeschooling our kids, once we decided to take the plunge, so outweighed all of our fears, in fact, erased so many of our fears, because it's the way, it's like it became so obvious how natural and important this is. Can you just share with some people right now, what are some of the most important benefits of homeschooling that you just cannot get in a public or government school system?
Well, I think the first and most obvious thing, Kirk, is that there's nobody on the planet that loves your children more than you as a parent, right? Mom and dad, there's nobody in the world that loves those children as much as you do. There's nobody who cares as much about them as you do. There's nobody who desires more strongly that their well-being be assured. And so when you realize that, right away you realize you have an advantage over anybody. I don't care if it's the best Christian private school in the world. They're not going to love your child as much as you do. So right off the bat, you've got this huge leg up on any other alternative. Second of all, when you have that one-on-one attention, there's really nothing that can beat that. Even in the most elite, wealthy private schools, you still have a classroom full of kids, even if it's a small classroom, 15 children. That's a totally different thing than having one-on-one relationship with parents, where you go at exactly the speed that's appropriate for that child. You can focus in on the special needs of that child, the learning style of that child, the interests of that child, right? That's one of the things that's so great about homeschooling, is it's so customized. It's so adaptable to the unique needs of every child. God literally made every person on this planet unique. The idea that we're just going to put them into a factory and every child gets the same treatment at the same time, learns the same thing in the same way from the same, it just doesn't make sense. And we would never accept that when it comes to grocery shopping or restaurants, and yet we accept it with the education of our children. So I think those two things give parents a huge advantage. And this is actually, if you look at the data, this is shown so clearly in the data on homeschoolers. There is now a lot of research. In fact, there's decades of research showing that homeschoolers do massively better academically and socially. They're far more likely to retain their parents' values, which I think is one of the things that many totalitarians dislike so strongly about homeschooling. And even on the social metrics, you hear people say, well, what about socialization? Well, the National Home Education Research Institute has done a lot of digging on this. The head there, Dr. Brian Ray, has actually done a review of all the journal articles that have been published, and what he's found is that on all the ones that you can measure, communication skills, self-esteem, involvement in the community, tolerance, homeschoolers just do so much better. And I think the reason why is clear. This is, in my view, the system that God put out there as the best one. And you look back through history, again, for 2,000 years of church history, the norm was homeschooling. Early on in our country, the overwhelming majority of America's founding fathers were primarily educated at home by their parents and by their older siblings. So it just makes sense. And one of the things that's so great about homeschooling, there are now so many resources out there, Kirk, to teach reading properly, say. The system that's used under the Common Core, which is in place almost in every state in this entire country, is in my opinion, blatant quackery. In fact, it's been known to be quackery since the 1840s when Horace Mann first tried it out in the public schools he was creating in Boston. And so you don't have to use these silly standards that have been proven ineffective, these methods that have been debunked 150 years ago. Parents can make the right choice for their children. It's just, it's so far above any other alternative. I can't speak enough good things about it.
What do you say to parents who say, I feel like this is probably the right thing and what I should be doing for my kids, but homeschooling seems to present insurmountable obstacles for me. I can't afford to homeschool my kids. I'm not equipped to homeschool my kids, and I'm a single parent. How have you seen parents overcome these kinds of obstacles?
I'm so glad you asked, Kirk, because we see these objections a lot, and I've actually seen parents overcome these obstacles. I've seen single moms take on the homeschooling of their children, and it relies on community and family. The mom has to go to work. Okay, so then you drop the children off with another homeschool family. You get involved in co-ops. I mean, my family and I were involved in 3 co-ops. Even with the education of complex subjects, chemistry. How am I going to teach chemistry? How am I going to teach Latin? Well, you don't need to necessarily take on that whole burden yourself. There's all kinds of alternatives now, not just co-ops. There's online schools that are popping up. I happen to teach economics at the Freedom Project Academy, is one among many. And I know you know of that school because I've seen you endorse it. It's a great option. There are many others like it. There are financial resources available out there for homeschoolers, for single parents. There are scholarships for people who want to do this. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, the nation's largest homeschool organization, I guess, they've got a foundation, a scholarship fund for homeschool parents who are low on finances. I think churches all across the country, if they're not doing this already, and I know more and more are, but if they're not already, they should be setting up scholarship funds to support single moms, setting up co-ops. So the options are endless. And I tell people, it seems like a daunting task, but once you jump into it, you'll see God really will bless you and will bless your family in an incredible way. If He calls you to do it, He's going to make a way for it to be possible to do it. All the objections that we hear, I want my children to be salt and light. I'm very sympathetic to that. And every once in a while, there is a child who can hold his ground and resist the pressure to conform to this humanistic worldview. But more often than not, your child is not only not being salt and light, they're being discipled by people who disagree with your values, who disagree with your worldview, who disagree with what you want to instill in your children. So, consider the objections and pray about it, but realize there are all kinds of supports. There are more resources than there have ever been in human history to do this. And there is nobody more equipped to educate and disciple your children than you. That's why God entrusted them to you. So even if it involves a sacrifice, and it will, it's going to mean less financial resources. It's going to mean less free time to watch television or whatever. But even if it involves a sacrifice, it's a sacrifice that's well worth it.
And the benefits are outstanding. And I know as a father who's experienced and is experiencing the benefits, and Alex, you can resonate with that. We are now seeing the fruit of the seeds that we planted when our children were young, and we spent the time and built up those relationships, and we're able to nurture them and guide them and instruct them and train them up in the way that they should go. And man, it's, like you said, likely the best thing that I ever did for my family.